Hey, what's up? I
All
hope you
right.
guys all had a great day. I'm Jordan Crook, managing editor at TechCrunch, and we are closing out the show with Dylan Field, who is the founder and CEO of Figma. It's one of the hottest enterprise startups out there today. The company has raised more than $130 million. Dylan, I'm excited to have you here today. How are you?
I'm excited to be here. Good to see you, Jordan. Thanks for
Me
having me.
too. Of course. So we're going to be taking some audience questions. So please use the Q&A if you would like to ask Dylan a question directly, and we will get to as many of them as possible. We will not be monitoring the chat for questions. So make sure to use the Q&A, not the chat. And with that, I thought we could talk a little bit, Dylan, about one of the interesting things I think about Figma is that you guys were in stealth for 4 years. Is that right?
I think it's a little bit less than that, but yeah, it was a long time. It felt like 4 years. So we started the company full time in August 2012. Before that, we had started talking about it like late 2011, and yeah, basically, it took us. It wasn't until December of 2015, I think, that we got to the point where we launched our closed beta, and it wasn't until October 2016 that we launched our GA. And also, just to back up for a second, like if you don't know Figma, basically what we do is we build a collaborative design tool in the browser. And so we use WebGL to make it so that you can use the GPU in your computer to make it so that you can edit designs collaboratively, like in a Google Doc. And yeah, I mean, I think it took us a while to kind of come up with the idea in the first place. And then it took us a long time to build it. So it was not a fast path to getting lots of customers for sure.
But what's crazy is okay, so 3 to 4 years in, stealth without users, you have no metrics, you have no true product market fit. I mean, obviously you could say, hey, we have WebGL now. There's obviously demand for more collaborative enterprise tools and design is booming. Like you can kind of put two and two together, but you're going to an investor for your seed round. Okay, you're in stealth, no big deal. Going for a series A, you're like still not ready to go yet, but it will be. How did you pitch investors and kind of get them on board and excited about what you were doing, knowing you'd still be in a shell for a little while longer?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think we thought that we would be out of that shell faster than we actually were. So that was part of it. And so I look back at our Series A pitch and go, oh, man, well, everything was actually just perfectly right. It was only off by a year. If you just take everything and translate it by 1 year, it was right. But no, it was kind of interesting for our Series A. I actually had approached John Lilly from Greylock in our seed round, and John Lilly, for those who don't know, he was the CEO of Mozilla and just an amazing guy on a lot of really cool boards and has a bunch of interesting experience for Figma. His mom was like a typographer. He has very deep roots in design. And I had approached him the seed round and he basically said to us, Dylan, I don't think you guys know what you're doing, but I'm very intrigued. So let's keep in touch. And this is like the famous line that you hear from every investor ever is like, yeah, let's keep in touch. Like, let me know how I can be helpful. And sometimes they actually mean it. So with John's case, he actually would follow up every few months, or I'd follow up with him. We'd grab coffee, and he helped me develop the strategy kind of like to a point where it is sort of where we're at today. And that was a collaboration. I mean, I could really learned a lot from him on that one. Because we started off and the idea was, let's have this global community around design. We'll have the tool. You'll be able to use the tool to like post the community. And like someday we'll think about how people can pay us. And sort of talking with John got me to the point of, okay, actually, let's start with a business tool. We'll build the community later. And now we're starting to work towards that, as we've talked about before. But yes, I went into our Series A. At some point, John told me, hey, if you ever think about raising again, let me know. And a few weeks later, I was like, John, I think maybe we'll raise, because I just wanted to work with him. And we talked to a few other investors. I think it's pretty important that there's always a competitive dynamic in the round. But really, it was just him for that round that we were really considering. And I think that he did us a solid. He really believed in us at a time that it wasn't like there were metrics to look at. He had conviction in the space. He had conviction in the tech. He had conviction in me and Evan, which I feel very, very honored by. And he's a dear mentor and friend to this day, and he's on our board, and it's been a really deep relationship.
And so you were kind of fostering that, not necessarily intentionally, but you made sure to keep up with John and he made sure to keep up with you. Like from the seat on, essentially, you were like, okay, this
Well,
is something that could turn into something. He's helping, he's, providing valuable advice, and you kind of like nurtured that relationship.
yeah, I wanted him on board in some way because, or even just, to spend time with him. Because every time we spent time together, he added value and he gave us great feedback. He made great connections. So he was adding so much value. And every time I walked away from the conversation, I thought, okay, wow, like there's like three things maybe we should change about the business. It's the earlier days, there's the sort of rate of change is higher than later on. Yesterday we had a board meeting. I had to call John afterwards, and I was like, okay, maybe there's like one thing to change, but he still is sort of creating that effect to this day. So it's been pretty cool.
What about people, right? Because like you don't just scale the amount of dollars in your bank account. You have to also build out a team without being out there in the market. And at the time, yes, like you were a Teal Fellow. You have some cachet behind your name, and obviously you got some great fundraising. But what else, right? Like to kind of recruit people in and bring them into the fold.
So I think that's one of the hardest parts of being in stealth. But for what it's worth, for those watching, like, I don't think the thing to learn and take away from this conversation is like, oh, I should go be in stealth for 3 years. I would avoid it if you can. One of the big reasons is recruiting. I remember going to see candidates and we would talk, and like literally I realized at some point that the time to me getting my laptop out and opening my computer and showing them Figma, like that really mattered in the conversation because people make judgments so quickly. Mm-hmm. And I started to kind of A/B test it a little bit. And I noticed for the candidates that I showed them Figma within the first few minutes versus the candidates where we just talked for a while, like the candidates we just talked for a while, they would bounce because they didn't believe that Figma was a real thing.
Yeah.
And the people I showed to you right away, they're like, whoa, you guys built something really cool. Like, I'm actually intrigued now. And then they'd start listening. And so I had to kind of get around that in the conversations. And so that was pretty tough. And I can't imagine how you would do it if I couldn't show people Figma, even in that stealthy context. I was kind of like look at them in the eyes and be like, hey, like we're in stealth. Like what I'm about to show you is confidential. Is that cool? And
so you didn't use like proper NDAs or anything. You just kind of like went out on a limb.
Like if someone's gonna like, break your, is gonna tell people about your thing. They're gonna tell the people about your thing, whether or not they're under NDA, probably.
Right. So and it took you years to build it. So it's like, try to copy us. You'll be years behind, right?
Well, not only that, but I think what's hard to kind of put ourselves in the shoes of now is that in 2014, 2015, like this was not inevitable in any way, shape, or form. I think we go to like our Series A conversation. The biggest question was, how big is the market? Like, how many designers are there in the world? Is the market big enough? That was the biggest question we had to kind of overcome at the time. And I have in my Series A, like I'm like, well, Google, like I have this like anecdotal data. They've increased their designer to engineer ratio in this way. But we didn't really know the numbers yet. And so that was a big thing that we had to overcome. And it was not like, now I think there's so much clarity around, wow, the design market's huge. There's all these different people. We're all trying to like, sort of work on the same problem and trying to compete with each other. At the time, that was totally not the case.
What about like, so we get to launch, right? And like, it had to be that the mentality of the company changes because now you have real users, you have real data, you are obviously trying to get it in the hands of as many users as possible, right? So things like marketing and communications and all of that stuff kind of comes full speed ahead. Can you talk a little bit about like how to manage those different departments as the company goes through a big shift like that and how they work together and kind of like how you change the framework as the company gets bigger? You can't just, do everything on Google Chat or whatever. You kind of have to build in some protocols.
Totally. We could spend the rest of the time in the interview talking about this, but I'll try to keep it brief. So I think, first of all, just on the marketing part, I think it's really important that you have marketing before launch. And that's because there's just a lot of things that you have to do in order to get the position of a product right. You need to think through the competitive landscape, obviously, but you also really need to come up with sort of a point of view on here's like why we exist in the world. A position statement is one way to call it, but really it's a point of view. And then from there, you kind of have to figure out like what are supporting planks of this? And that should, I think, impact the way you talk on your careers page, the way that you talk, in the first blog post you write about the company, if you're pitching a journalist, all these different sort of touch points need to link back to that single message. And I think that's because as your customers are encountering you, you need to be able to have that clarity. And I think it's also really important that in addition to having that singular message, you really think through like, what is our launch strategy? And that launch strategy might take months to develop. It's not like it happens overnight. And so we were really lucky to have an amazing marketing hire that we hired, I think maybe 3 to 6 months before our launch of a closed beta. And not only was she great at the marketing side, but she was also a really good operator in general, just like a total athlete hustler type. And when I say athlete, I mean somebody who can do like lots of different things. And although she also is an amazing athlete on her own, talking about this woman, Claire Butler, just to give her a shout out. And so she's somebody who's now our director of community at Figma. She's continuing to grow and continuing to go on and lead great initiatives. But having her in the company early was super instrumental. On the product engineering side, I think one thing that people don't always realize is that you need to scale your decision-making a bit, and also you need to give your employees more freedom and flexibility. So I think it's very easy to fall into the trap of a founder where this sort of founding trap where like people come to you with a question and you give them the answer, right? And you might say, well, why is that so bad? Like I've thought a lot about this problem. Like I have a lot of things in my head. I should just tell them things. And the reality is that like you've hired smart, creative people, you need to empower them. And when you get to the point where 10, 15 people, you need to start having basic processes in place about like, okay, here's how we kick off a project. Like, here's how we define what the problem that we're solving is, what the scope of the solution might be, things like that. And then we need to have some kind of process through which we check in with each other to make sure that we're in sync and things are not going off track, but also need to have some flexibility and freedom to explore what the options might be for solving this problem. And it can't just come from you. And I definitely made that mistake quite a bit early on. And I didn't learn that technique until our first manager, Sho Komodo, who was coming from, at the time, he'd been working on a startup, but before that he was at Medium. Before that, he was at Macromedia and Adobe, so long history in the space. And Sho really helped us kind of develop those processes and build those muscles. Before that, I think my team was a bit frustrated with me, honestly, or even more than a bit, because I wasn't empowering them enough. And so that's one of the things that also has to change is you have to empower people more as well as to build these functions.
Can we talk a little bit too about like company culture, right? Mm-hmm. Because like I've been thinking a lot about it. Especially in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement and kind of the way that culture fit has been used sometimes in an exclusionary way. Yep. Especially when it comes to recruiting. And it's like people are so complicated. Like each individual person is such a complicated thing in and of itself. And they all have something different to bring to the table. And yet you need something that kind of like binds them all together, like a North Star. We talked about this before, your mission statement changed. Can you tell me a little bit about like, how do you allow people to express their true self at work and kind of bring themselves to the table, but to ensure that as a company, here's the framework by which we make decisions. Here's how we kind of think through our value proposition. Like, can you talk a little bit about that?
Totally. I mean, I'll talk a little bit about Figma, but also first I'll talk a bit about like what it means to form a company culture in the early stages, just to make sure it's applicable to everybody. I think in the early stages, when you're just a few hires, the question of like, what is our culture is so undefined because every person you hire is changing your culture in the early stages. It's almost like you have all these different force vectors and they're not necessarily aligning. And you don't know what the span is yet. You don't know what the sort of like commonalities are that bind you together, like you said. And, I think there's basic questions that you're deciding implicitly when you hire people, such as, are we a competitive culture or like a collaborative culture? Are we a culture that's cool with ego or are we like very humble about ourselves? Is this a culture that's just about the work and we go home? Or are we going to like be more of a family? And if we're more of a family, what does it even mean? And so I think, are we a culture where we're heads down all the time or do we talk a lot? Like there's just like all these different things that get impacted and built slowly as you hire every single person. And I think that you have to be pretty deliberate about this stuff because otherwise you might find yourself in a place where things don't feel good. One of the things that we did eventually was we try to create sort of like very formal, vision, mission, values. And the way on the vision mission side, I think that you kind of have to decide that as a founder on your own. Original vision was eliminate the gap between imagination and reality. That was a bit too abstract for people. I still like it a lot, but eventually we changed it to make design accessible to all. And our mission is to help teams collaborate visually. And then for the values side, that's not something you can decide on your own, in my opinion. I think you really need to go through a process where you involve your team. And for us, that meant basically create a survey and then trying to figure out from that survey, what is it that people are saying, sort of like what are the main clusters that we can build momentum around. And for us, I ended up picking 3. And a lot of custom companies have more than 3, but for us, I wanted it to be something that was memorable for people that no one would forget. And so we actually made them the 3 primary shapes because we're a design company. So our values are a circle, a triangle, and a square. The circle is foster inclusivity. The triangle is be bold. The square is have fun. And you'll notice I didn't say anything like integrity or respect or customer centricity. Like, I just assume that if you're working at Figma, like I'm assuming that you've got integrity. I'm assuming you'll be respectful. I'm assuming you'll be customer centric. As we scale, perhaps we have to like think more about like whether those things are like stated values as well. But for me, you're asking about like bringing your whole self to work and in the spirit of fostering inclusivity. That's something that matters to us a lot. And when people are not able to do that, then we study it really carefully and we really care about that. And something that comes up and we talk about, or in the context of Black Lives Matter, the tragic killings. I think, that was an area where it was sort of like reflexive in terms of we need to go make space for this. We need to talk about it as a group. And we need to figure out like, what adjustments we can make to our DE&I strategies, where we're falling short, what we're doing, what should we continue doing? And also what do we stop doing? What do we keep doing? What do we do that's new? And so, these are all things that I think we try to think about a lot. There's no magic solution to anything on this stuff. I want to talk about the have fun value for a second because it's a weird one. And I think it's also relates back to our early culture. So in the early days of Figma, like we were a very heads down office. Like we're trying to ship some stuff, software. But like, if you walked in the office, you could have heard a pin drop. It was really quiet. There was no fun being had. And so when I told everybody, like, here are 3 values, like have fun was a little bit aspirational for us at the time. But that came out of a real need that I was trying to solve. I was like, if we can't be a more fun culture, if we can't get it to be that people enjoy working here, no one's going to stay. And so that I think is something that now would feel, natural in Figma. If you went to one of our all hands or show and tells or any team meeting, you would feel like it's pretty fun, I think. But it wasn't always that way. And it's something that we had to work towards, ironically, had to work to have fun.
Right. That's what you like to hear.
Exactly.
So I have one more question from me, and then I want to get into some audience questions. And audience members, remember, you can use the Q&A to add your questions. So my last one is peak and pit. As an entrepreneur, what's the peak for you? What was your just moment where you were just so filled with joy and happiness and felt successful? And what was the moment where you felt like, I don't want to get out of bed. This sucks.
Yeah. I think I'm less of a peak person in general. I think, I think of peaks in my life as like times where like I remember a tandem hang gliding ride I had where like that was amazing. Or, I think like when just anytime a customer shows me something they've done in Figma, honestly, that's a peak moment for me pretty much. Walking around when we had an office, walking around the office and just seeing people now that we don't, being on a Zoom call and seeing people's faces, like when we're in the sort of grid mode, and just being able to like associate with our employees and, or hearing how someone's life has been impacted by Figma. That's like, those are all peak moments for me. It's not like there's been like one specific one where it's like, we've made it now. But like, any time along the journey where we see people being helped, that's pretty meaningful. I think pit moment to me is just, is related to that time when I was talking about in terms of like, we were not empowering people enough. This is early on. And, I had a pretty frank conversation with our employees and they gave me some feedback that really was tough for me to process at the time. And, I think I swallowed that pill and kind of like, over time was able to adapt, but it took me a while. And that was a pit moment for a while. And I really appreciate the feedback they gave though, because it helped me grow. It helped the company grow. And it made our culture better.
Yeah. Okay. Let's get to some audience questions. This one comes from Sharma. She asks, I don't know, Sharma says, can you explain how to do a successful closed beta for early stage startups?
Yeah, so I think it's all about basically getting user feedback and seeing what the sort of engagement's like with your product. So in our closed beta, I guess I'll start with before we even got to the closed beta. We basically went around and talked to every team we could and try to convince them to use Figma. So, for example, one of the earliest teams that used Figma was Krypton, which is now called Coda. And I remember going to their office, showing them Figma in person with my co-founder. And, at the end of the meeting, they're like, yeah, like we're interested in Figma. Like, we'll try it out. And we were just, oh my God, on the way back, we're driving back to the city, halfway back to the city from Palo Alto, where their office was at the time. We got an email that said, hey, like the font daemon stopped working. We can't use our fonts in Figma anymore. So we'll have to evaluate this again in a few months. So I gave the phone to Evan, my co-founder, and said, turn around, reply to them and say, well, we're right there. We turned around the car and came back to the office and went and fixed that again. And they became our first customer, basically. And I think at the start of a closed beta, you just got to hustle. You have to do everything you can to get people using the software. I think after that, as you start getting more proof points, people using it, then you need to have some kind of launch probably in terms of showing people sort of what the future is. And I think that for any product launch, you have to have something that sort of hints at what this could be and why this will be exciting. And without that, it's going to be a tough sell and people won't really get too excited about it. And so if you have those ingredients right, then, put it on the world, have an email list, but also know that that email list, if you wait a long time to send out your invites to your closed beta, people forget who you are because we only have so many brands we can associate in our head. And every day we're inundated with new things. And so if you say, you wait 6 months, your conversion rate will meaningfully drop when you send out a bunch of invites to your closed beta. So just know that as well. And I think watch the metrics, make sure you've instrumented your product before the closed beta, watch the metrics, see how people are using it, how much they're using it. People log in once, they never use it again. Not a great sign. Probably want to talk to them to figure out what's going on and why they aren't using it. You there, Jordan? Uh-oh. Jordan, are you there? Yeah. So the question is, as a founder, how do you get out of your own head and move forward quickly? Honestly, something that I struggle with sometimes, but so I don't have a perfect answer, but I find that just like as cliche as it is, sleep, exercise are the two things that I find help my mental state the most. And then also, I think just being around people who are offset from you a bit in terms of their emotional cycles is really helpful, because when you have a low moment that way, you can talk to somebody else and have a peer that is hopefully having a higher moment. That could be a co-founder, but it also could be people that you hire that you work with closely and are thought partners to you.
Am I back?
Jordan, good to see you.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
Unreliable internet in the age of COVID. Arvind has a question. What were the most common negative responses that you received from VCs during the early days?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that's really interesting about VCs is that they very rarely tell you negative things. And so I always take feedback as like a blessing. But yeah, I mean, I think the lack of feedback is definitely even much worse than feedback. And so I remember for early days of Figma, man, I mean, like some of the rejections we got, I mean, again, market was not big enough. That was one of the key ones. Some people wouldn't take meetings because they wouldn't believe that what we wanted to build was possible to build. And, if they had taken the meeting, they would have seen that it was, and we could have shown them, but it is what it is. I think, amazingly, this is the one thing I really appreciate with the tech industry is no one said you were too young and haven't managed people. Like, I just think that's unreal still, but that's definitely, something that I really appreciated. And no one doubted me because of my age, even though I was like 20 at the time. That was never even came up. So that was really cool.
That's interesting.
And it could be a position of privilege too. I mean, I'm a white dude, and perhaps other people would have different experiences there, but I was really shocked by that.
Okay, so I think we have time for maybe two, depending on the length of your answer, but definitely one.
Okay.
Kara asks, what do you feel like were the advantages of having a big bang launch as opposed to more iteratively getting out there?
Yeah. I question myself all the time. It's impossible to really run both scenarios, but contrast our approach to sketches, for example, where, we thought, okay, we have to get everything perfect before we launch, not have bugs, really have a lot of reliable, software. And I think Sketch, in contrast, put their thing out and grew way more faster. So I question whether it was the right approach or not. I think the advantages were, like, once you go down track and you've been stealthy for a long time, having a big launch really sets the tone. It makes it so people know this is something that they should care about. So if you're gonna not do the iterative thing, then I definitely encourage everyone to try to go big when they do a launch.
Do you think that had an effect, like, internally too, in terms of like the team?
Sure. Well, so after we had spent years working on it, I mean, like, not only were there some management stuff around me not empowering people enough, but also there's this core fundamental question of, like, is what we're building, does it even matter? And so the response we got on launch of, like, whoa, this is awesome, from some people, of course, there were also haters, but the whoa, this is awesome response, that definitely meant a lot. And it really mattered to the team at the time.
Okay, we'll have 1 minute for one more.
Great.
So hopefully you can answer this quickly. France wants to know, when it took time to launch, between funding and launch, like, were there tough conversations with investors? Were they patient, or did you have to work that out?
Our investors, which were at the time on our board, were Danny Reimer and John Lilly. They were incredibly patient in a way that most investors probably wouldn't be. So we got lucky. What I will say is that after launch, when we took more time to get to the point where we monetized, that's when people were less patient. And they were rightfully so less patient. And I'm really glad they pushed me to that point to monetize, because we monetized way too late. That's a story for another time, if we can chat more about it later.
Yeah, I would love to. We should talk about it, and then we can put it in the Extra Crunch article.
Sounds good.
Okay. That's all the time that we have, unfortunately, Dylan, but it was a pleasure to chat with you, and thank you so much for your thoughtful answers. Really appreciate it.
It's awesome to be here, and yeah, thank you again.
Yeah, of course. Okay, the show is over, but I do have a couple closing remarks. I wanted to say, for all attendees, these sessions are available on the agenda page on Visivo. So you can check out everything from yesterday. It's on there now, and everything from today will be on there. So if you missed stuff, which you should have, you can check that out whenever. Also, we will be posting recaps on Extra Crunch. And as a ticket holder, you are getting 1 year of free Extra Crunch. A unique code will be sent to the email you used to register for this event. And you can sign up. It's as easy as that. And you can enjoy all those recaps there, as well as access to Extra Crunch Live, investor surveys, and a bunch of other analysis and deep reporting. I also just wanted to mention Disrupt is coming up soon, September 14th through 18th. And as ticket holders, again, you get $100 off either your digital Pro Pass or a Startup Alley exhibitor package. Definitely check that out. It's going to be an amazing show. And I don't say that because it's my baby and I work hard on it all year long. I say it because it's actually going to be amazing. So check it out. And with that, I am going to throw to Joey Hinson, who runs our business.
Wow, that's a wrap. My name is Joey Hinson. I run the business side of TechCrunch. Thank you so much for joining us. This event represented a few firsts for us. This was our first early stage event, and this was our first full-fledged virtual event. After the event, you'll receive a survey, as Jordan said. Please take a couple of minutes to fill that out so we can continue to improve. We wouldn't be able to bring you this event without the support of our sponsors. Thank you to Bizibo, our virtual conference platform for early stage, Dell for entrepreneurs, work from home. TechCrunch will continue to bring you great events, and go to techcrunch.com/events to see where we'll be next. Thank you very much.